Hey everyone, welcome to This Prepared Life. I'm Allison and welcome to my homestead kitchen. Today I'm going to talk about dehydrating food. We're going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages as well as dehydrated food in your long-term food storage. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Dehydration is one of the oldest methods of food preservation, and in my opinion, it is one of the easiest methods of food preservation to get started in. And I think it's important to note the difference between food preservation and food storage. Food preservation is taking a food from its original state or close to its original state and transforming it into something that is shelf stable or preserved in some way. So water bath canning, pickling, dehydrating, freeze drying, pressure canning, fermenting, all food preservation methods. Food storage is taking a food that has already been made shelf stable and storing it in a way that is going to extend its shelf life. And that is specifically talking about dry goods. You can do food storage for freezer foods and things like that, but food preservation versus food storage. So today we're talking about dehydration, which, like I said, is, in my opinion, one of the easiest methods to get started in. It can be very low cost. It does not take a lot of time or food prep, and the majority of its time is hands off. So if you have not jumped into food dehydration, I urge you to. It is a great method to jump into and preserve foods for your kitchen pantry or your long-term layer. So there are many ways to dehydrate foods, and electric dehydrators are only one of them. You can use the sun to dehydrate food. You can use your conventional oven if it goes to a low enough temperature to dehydrate food. You can use electric dehydrators. There's air drying, hanging bunches of herbs to dry. That's air drying. That's a method of dehydration. Solar dehydrating. And there's a couple different kinds of solar dehydrators. Some that you can even build yourself using screens and glass windows. So the main methods of dehydration that I use are my electric dehydrators and air drying. And so why dehydrate foods? Some of the benefits of that are, one, you're making a food shelf stable. That case of peaches that you bought when they were in season from the local farmer down the road, you can dehydrate those, store them on jars in your pantry, and come December, January, February, you are eating absolutely delicious peaches that you put up yourself. Another benefit of dehydration is that it is minimal work. Some foods need blanched, some foods need pre-treated, but the majority of foods do not. It is peel, chop, put on the trays, start the dehydrator, package it when it's done. So it really is a lot less work than, say, water bath canning or pressure canning, things like that. Dehydrating food can save you money. If you can buy food in bulk and preserve that in a way that you can eat it later, bulk food is often cheaper. It is also cheaper to often make your own dehydrated snacks than purchase them from the store. My one ingredient fruit leather is so easy to make, and I make multiple jars of that every year, and it tastes better. I know what's in it, and it really is minimal work. So making your own dehydrated snacks can save you money as well. Dehydrated food is really lightweight and it's portable. It takes up a lot less space because you have removed the moisture from that food, which makes it smaller. It also makes the flavor concentrated for some things because removing that moisture, you're still left with all that flavor. So for some foods, They really are just a burst of flavor when you've dehydrated them. So, and then another benefit of dehydration is that it is one of the lowest cost options for food preservation. You can use so many different types of dehydrators. You don't have to spend $300–400 on the top of the line dehydrator. Is it going to have bells and whistles? Yes. Is it necessary? Absolutely not. And check out my next video where I'm going to highlight 2 different electric dehydrators that I own. And I'm also going to share the story of my very first dehydrator that I found in a garbage bag. So check out my next video for that. Disadvantages of dehydrating food is there is some nutrient loss. And the longer it sits in your storage, the more nutrient loss you have. So some of the vitamins that are impacted by dehydration are vitamin A and vitamin C. Vitamin A and vitamin C are destroyed by heat and air. So packaging your food properly is really important. Vitamin C is impacted by almost all food preservation methods. So for long-term storage, you really also need to be storing vitamin C in your storage, but that is a video for another time. Blanching vegetables can often result in loss of vitamin C as well as B complex vitamins. So be mindful of that. Another disadvantage of dehydrated food, and specifically dehydrated vegetables, is that they are not palatable to everyone. As an example, my family despises dehydrated carrots. We think that they are rubber pucks of grossness. Just to be totally honest with you here, we don't like dehydrated vegetables. So we have always water bath canned or pressure canned, pickled vegetables. We blanch and freeze vegetables, and now we freeze dry vegetables. We much prefer freeze drying to dehydrating. And I am finding out across the board that we prefer freeze drying to dehydrating for everything, not just vegetables. But not all of us can afford a freeze dryer. We have had our freeze dryer for over 2 years now and absolutely loving it. But it was like my bucket list item for years, and I made do with my dehydrator. So you do not have to have a freeze dryer. It is absolutely wonderful to have a freeze dryer, but dehydration works as well. So those are some of the disadvantages: the nutrient loss and the vitamin loss in the food, as well as, taste and texture can be impacted. So I really suggest don't dehydrate a bunch of carrots and do an entire 25-pound bag of carrots your first go around. Experiment. Do a little bit of each thing and figure out what your family likes before you do bulk batches of any kind of food preservation, even canning, pressure canning. Do small recipes before you do big recipes. Let's talk about dehydration for long-term food storage. So one of the key important factors of long-term food storage is moisture content. You should not store food with a moisture content higher than 10% in your long-term food storage. With home dehydrated food, your moisture content is anywhere between 5 and 20%. So unless you're going to test each batch of food, you're not really going to know what the moisture content is. So the rule of thumb with long-term food storage and home dehydrated foods is that they need to be crisp. They need to snap. If you took a dehydrated apple in your hand and snapped it, that would be able to be stored long term. Whereas dehydrated peaches are done when they're still pliable. They're soft and bendable. You're not going to be able to store those in long-term storage. So make sure that the moisture content of any food you are putting in long-term storage is under 10%. With dehydrated foods specifically, just check that they are crisp. Proper storage conditions is the next thing to consider with dehydrated foods. We know that the factors that impact food storage are heat, so temperature, moisture, oxygen, light, and insects and rodents. So how are you protecting your long-term food storage and the dehydrated foods that you have in storage from those things? So this is a jar of unlabeled, but it looks like cherry fruit leather. When I am dehydrating food, I pack it in jars for short term. And by short term, if we're going to eat it in the next year, that's short term. So we buy the food when it is in season. I process it and do whatever food preservation method that we prefer for that item. And then I know that that item is going to most likely be gone by the time that food comes into season again. So anything like that, I just put into jars. This would be a moist food. It would not be stored long term. So, but the jars then can go on my pantry shelves, and in a jar, it's protected from oxygen. It is not protected from light, but I'm not leaving these in the sunshine. They're in my basement. They're in creepy basement. So when thinking about home dehydrated foods and long-term storage, think about your moisture content. We said under 10%. Is it crisp? Does it snap? Think about the storage conditions that you have and the packaging that you are going to store it into. For long-term storage, Mylar is always best. I do have a course on Mylar for food storage. If you are unfamiliar with Mylar, go ahead and check that out on my website. Short-term jars work just fine. I don't even use an oxygen absorber for short-term unless it's freeze-dried food. Like these apples, these are freeze-dried. I did put an oxygen absorber in there. And then another thing to think about with dehydrated food, and this is just like a bonus tip for you, dehydrated food, depending on what you're doing, can smells up the entire room. So for some foods, I just buy them. Dehydrated onions, I got this huge can. How much? Let's see, this is 2.1 pounds of onions. So 238 servings of onions. These are dehydrated diced onions. And because these are commercially packaged in a number 10 can, they will last until 2051. So number 10 cans are one of the top preferred methods for food storage. Food in these cans lasts a very long time. For dehydrated foods, I often think about, can I just purchase that item for cheaper than if I'm going to do it myself, or for less mess? So onions and garlic I purchase. If you were going to do those on your own, I highly suggest doing them on your porch. So those are some advantages and disadvantages of home dehydrated food, and then some factors to consider for your long-term food storage. Thanks so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you would like more homestead prepper content. Thanks for being here.